Hi, my name is Sarah Sadowski, and I was responsible for the case of Leigh Scott. Leigh Scott is a case that every teacher dreads to come across, but unfortunately most likely will come across one time in his or her career. The summary of the case is that there were two boys in Leigh Scott's class, Dale and Aaron. Both of these boys were sophomore level students in an average level government course. Both boys did not participate in class discussions. They performed less than average, often resulting in work that resulted in letter grades of a D. But there were two differences amongst the two boys. Aaron, he actually slept through course. He didn't take out a notebook, he didn't watch the teacher, he just slept. Whereas Dale, he took notes during the class and tried to participate. However, neither boy did answer any questions while participating in class. At the end of the semester, the grades were handed out, and there was a vast difference between the two boys' work. Now, like I've stated, most of the boys' work both ended up in their letter grade of a D. So you would think probably both of the boys their letter grade resulted in a D. However, Dale got a C in the course, and Aaron got a D. This outraged Aaron. He wanted to know why his grade was so much lower. So at this point, I would want to know what you would think. As a teacher, why do you think there would be a differential in grades? What are some components that actually change grades amongst different people? I would ask the class to have a class discussion with me at this point about this. The next thing I would present is that Dale is a white male student, Aaron is a black male student. Does this change things? Do you think this changes perceptions of what the grades should be? The reason I want to point this out to the class and have this discussion is because this is what the argument was by Aaron. Aaron said that he was given a D because he was a black student, and Dale was given a C because he was a white student. But there's a few things that Aaron might not have known. There are two large pieces of legislation that cover a lot of our students in the district today. The piece of legislature idea, and also Section 504, which most of you know where I'm going with this. Dale was a mainstream student. Dale was taken from the special ed and was put into a general population course to be mainstreamed with his peers. His special education teacher thought that Dale could perform at the level to keep up with the general public. Oftentimes, Leigh Scott and the special education teacher would meet together, and they would speak about Dale's work, and they would discuss how Dale was performing. And they both decided that Dale was performing at a level where he was learning and he was sustaining the same amount as everyone else in the general education course. Now, at this point, I would like to know if he's a mainstream student, does this change your opinion about how you should grade? I would have another class discussion about, does grading systems change because of a mainstream student? How do you incorporate them? Do you grade them the same? Should it be fair? Should they have it easier? Should they have more time? What different categories are placed on those students that are actually included in these general education courses that have IEPs? There are three issues that I mainly focused on in this case. First one was, what is inclusion? The second was, what are teacher perception and beliefs about inclusion? How do teachers feel about inclusion? Do they want these students in their classroom? Are they afraid of them? Do they think that it's a waste of time, a waste of money? What are their actual perceptions? And lastly, how does one grade fairly? When you have a mainstream student and you have a general education student, how do you grade them the same? Are they the same student? Well, let's start with what is inclusion and mainstreaming. First thing I found fascinating is that inclusion is not a legal term. I thought this was fascinating because we keep going over inclusion and mainstreaming, and that these students have to be included in our classes. If it's not a legal term, then where is it deriving from? And it emerged from the two forms of legislature. First was idea, and then second was Section 504. IDEA ensured that students with disability had maximum access to educational benefits to public school system. IDEA also put them in the least restrictive environment for them to learn. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act says that any student who has an impairment that limits a major life activity can qualify for a service. So these two pieces of legislation put together any student who has an impairment, a disability, a special need, where they have to be accommodated, but they have to be accommodated in a least restrictive environment. Now, interesting enough, there were some gentlemen that counter-argued this. And what I had read in my research and what I had come across was an article by a gentleman named Master George and Martinez. They said an interesting quote. They said students will thrive in an inclusive learning environment where supplementary accommodation aids and services are available to help teachers meet student needs. Another implicit assumption is that students are able to, or that teachers are able to accurately assess the performance of students with disabilities. So we're assuming that by putting these students in general education classes, that the general education teacher is prepared for them, that they have the accommodations in the classroom for these students, that they have the knowledge how to teach a student with special needs. It's an assumption that the students are coming into a general education course where a general education teacher knows how to teach them at the best level. Just because the least restrictive environment means that he will be around his peers, does that mean that's the best learning environment for him? There are some ways to approach inclusion, which include co-teaching. There are 4 approaches. The first one, a teacher teaches and the other one roams the room. This one is the one that I have heard happens most frequently. And it often happens where the general education teacher is teaching and the special education teacher is roaming the room. The second approach is station teaching, where they break into groups. Usually the inclusion students, the mainstream students, are put into the general population into separate little groups, and both teachers roam the classroom and they ask questions and make sure everyone's on track. The third type is parallel teaching, where there are 2 teachers in the classroom, and then there are 2 split distinct groups. Each teacher teaches one group the same exact content. Lastly is alternative teaching, where there's one large group and one small group. The small group usually has the mainstream students and the large group has the general population. So you can tell that most likely the general education teacher is teaching the general population, whereas the student teacher is teaching those mainstream students. The problem is that co-teaching is being initiated primarily for the compliance of No Child Left Behind, and less for the quality of instruction for students with disabilities and their non-disabled peers, Nichols says. This is an article that I found that says that often teachers don't want to participate in co-teaching. They don't know how to, they weren't trained how to, but they have to because it has to be within the legislation. And that is the reason that they are co-teaching. And from the stories that I've heard from teachers in co-teaching classrooms, this is often what I hear, that one teacher is responsible for most everything and the other teacher does little of nothing. So are we really reaching those students that are mainstreamed? Next is teacher beliefs and perceptions. A lot of teachers believe that inclusion makes teaching more difficult.